the latest in tech and accessibility. This is Access Tech Live with Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Welcome back to Access Tech Live. I am Scott. Marc Aflalo is with me as always this week, and time now to welcome our guest in. He's a familiar face and voice on AMI TV and a great friend of the show. It's unusual for me to introduce you, Alex Smyth, because normally it's the other way around when you're introducing me when you're sitting in for Dave on Now with Dave Brown. But it's nice to welcome you to Access Tech Live. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Oh, thank you both for having me on. It's the first chance I've had. I'm excited to be here and chat all about hearing aids with you both.
Yeah, well, exactly, and it's such an interesting conversation to have because I think, you know, we don't really think about the technological side of hearing aids too much. We just think of them as hearing aids, but we don't think about the technology in them. So we're going to dive into all that. But before that, for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about you and your role here at AMI.
Yeah, so I am currently a co-host and producer with Now with Dave Brown, which is the morning live show here on AMI TV. And I've been with AMI for over 6 years now. I first originally started as a broadcast presenter / reporter with AMI This Week, and I was based out in Edmonton, then eventually came back over to Toronto and worked on a bunch of different project across AMI, and yeah, for myself, I've been a hearing aid user since I was about 3.5 years old. I live with Usher syndrome, so that is a combination of retinitis pigmentosa coupled with hearing loss. It is a genetic disorder impacting both the development of the eyes and the ears. And for myself, it really manifested as hearing loss first, and that's where, you know, my first introduction to disability and accessible tech all started through hearing aids. And that's really kind of where my journey with my disability began.
So Alex, was your first experience with actual hearing aid use when you were diagnosed with 3?
So I originally, it would have been back when I was like 3.5, 4 years old. I basically, the story I always tell is the fact that I remember distinctly being, you know, down on the main floor of my house, and my mom was on the second floor, looking down at me over our open kind of staircase, and she was asking me something. I kept saying, "What?" At first, she thought I was being smart and you know, causing problems, but then after like the third or fourth time she mentioned it, I kind of remember distinctly her facial expression changing into worry, and so soon after that, we got connected with an audiologist, and I kind of discovered it was I was suffering from hearing loss, and so that was really the first introduction that I had in terms of not being able to hear and not knowing really what the true cause of it was, and then getting connected and soon enough paired up with hearing aids and being able to hear better because I had hearing aids that I could wear and it would amplify everything around me.
So what's changed since then, Alex? Because, you know, I think about the technology and how it's evolved in a very short space of time to some degree. I mean, we all remember those cell phones that started off like briefcases, right? You know, I can just imagine how hearing aid technology has evolved.
Oh, absolutely. Specifically when it came to, there's a few different kind of real innovations that have taken place since I've started wearing in like 93, 94. The big one was switching from an analog hearing aid to a digital hearing aid. That technology was groundbreaking. The quality of sound increase that came with that was huge. And then beyond that was the evolution and the iterations of FM units to really connect two users and have it kind of patched into the hearing aid itself. So starting with the digital and analog changes, it's really hard to describe how a digital hearing aid sounds to someone who's never really experienced it, but making that transition from even just one hearing aid to another, but specifically the analog to the digital, everything sounded simultaneously louder while also being more muffled and quieter and harder to hear. It almost sounded like you were underwater with someone using a blowhorn to really speak with you. It was such a unusual feeling. And what takes place is your brain over a period of a few months learns to process that sound better. And then it normalizes it. It kind of gets used to what the sound is, what you're picking up, and you no longer notice it. But every time you went through that transition, it's that process again that you have to get used to this new sound. So that was one huge innovation. The other one, as I mentioned, was the FM units. The first one I remember wearing in elementary school was basically like a Walkman. I had the two plugs in the back of my hearing aids. I wore a belt that had the FM unit on my hip, walking around being able to hear the teacher who had to wear a similar getup. Then it evolved into this like headset that was basically like, you know, peak late 90s, early 2000s fast food restaurants at a drive-through window with a headset. So that was always like the kind of descriptor there. And then slowly it became more and more wireless, more compact, to the point now that, you know, a very simple device would just be something, whether it's in a hidden piece on the person who's wearing the unit, or it may just be disguised within the hearing aid itself or another device that doesn't really draw attention to itself. So that's really been the evolution from when I started first listening to and using hearing devices to now.
So Alex, you know, you talk about obviously evolution of the hearing aids themselves. So while they're simultaneously helping you, they're also simultaneously getting smaller and I guess being less visible and less noticeable. Was there, like, emotionally, like, how did it affect you? Was there a stigma wearing this giant belt around your, you know, and having the teacher have to wear it? How was that interacting with your peers around you?
Oh, it was always a challenge, and there was definitely stigma around it. And anytime, you know, I'd be out and about, and even within taking the FM units out of it, like just wearing hearing aids, there would always be kids who may not be aware, especially when you're growing up. You want to fit in. You don't want to stand out like a sore thumb. But, you know, when you got something in your ears and they're quite visible and they're different colors, because I wanted to have my hearing aids have my favorite colors on them, would be green or red or blue or what have you. People are going to be able to notice it, and they're going to ask you questions. So interestingly, it became a very easy process for me to deal with those types of interactions, those types of identification, where it'd be, oh, you have something in your ear, what is that? And I would be comfortable answering, oh, it's a hearing aid, it helped me hear. Yeah. And usually that was, for a lot of people, that was enough. They didn't need any more. Then there are others, obviously, that would kind of dive a bit deeper, or, you know, if someone wanted to make fun of me, well, it's an easy marker that you could use to make fun of someone. It's like, oh, you're weird, you can't hear that well, or this or that. You know, you have to use hearing aids. Oh, they look weird, they don't look cool. So there was always that aspect, but my parents were always very conscious of it. They were instilling, it's like, okay, you know, you have to fit in this world. You got to get used to this. This is your situation. You know, learn to live with it. It's not going away. It's sticking with you for your life. So make the best path forward for yourself that you can. And I've been able to do that.
I want to ask you a little bit about apps, because, you know, there's an app for everything these days, right? And one app that I've been trying out recently is called Mimi, M-I-M-I. And it's an app which helps diagnose hearing in people, almost look at what your hearing is like and how it's behaving. And even you can build out of it an audiogram that you can then use with your AirPods and all of that kind of stuff. Have you ever tried anything like that out? Have you ever found a purpose for it?
You know, I've never really messed around with the apps, with the Bluetooth, things like that. I've always been very hesitant. And part of that really stems from the fact that even as I speak to both of you now, I wear a set of wired over-the-ear headphones. Now, my hearing aid technology and the technology of today, very easily, there could be a Bluetooth connection to the computer that doesn't require headphones. I like having a sense of control over what I'm hearing when I'm hearing it. If there's ever a situation where, let's say there's an emergency or something comes up immediately, I can just throw off my headphones and I can hear the environment around me. If I'm connected into my hearing aids through Bluetooth or something like that, through an app or a device, if I'm watching YouTube or a movie, if there's something going on around me, there's multiple steps now I need to go through in order to cut the sound from that and be able to listen in the moment and be present. So for me, it's always about maintaining that control over my environment as much as I can, especially now that, you know, I also have vision loss as well. So it becomes increasingly important and a a feature that I like to maintain and have that sense of control in that environment, because there are a lot of the control I don't have, because I don't see well, I don't hear well. So that's really important to me. But that said, I've heard phenomenal things about just different apps and programs and things that are available for people with hearing loss that want to really dive into that want to kind of maximize the full potential of what the technology can do for them now.
You know, Alex, I got a little personal story here with my mother-in-law. We suspected that she had hearing loss just based on things like TV being blaringly loud when we were calling her. So when my kids actually found the Mimi app that Stephen mentioned, and they decided to use it and see if she had hearing loss. And they did it on themselves. And as kids, obviously their hearing is but their hearing was impeccable. And they put it on my mother-in-law, and they noticed a significant loss in one of her sides. So that led us down the path of going to an audiologist. And we live in Montreal, so we went to an audiologist in Quebec. And she went through the process, and yes, there's some degenerative hearing loss. And immediately they said, okay, it's going to be about $7,000 for your hearing aids, which was the first sign that, okay, wait a second, let's step back here for a minute. Now, having done some research and been in conversations about this, I knew that things like over-the-counter hearing aids are becoming popular, especially in the US. And I knew that some people had gone to Costco. So I started calling around. And I found out just by crossing the border from Quebec into Ontario, going to a Costco, they were able to sell her the exact same, I think it was a Jabra or maybe Plantronics hearing aid for $1,700. She had to go through the audiologist test again and do the whole process. But the whole process was cheaper than even getting the test done, let alone trying to figure out how to spend $7,000 in Quebec. What do you think is the disconnect? Why is there such a big difference between one province to another or one audiologist to another? It seems so strange.
Yeah, it really comes down to there was a lot of secrecy, a lot of protections around identifying what is the cost of hearing aid products. Because you can look online, and I've tried doing it myself, to try to find name brand products, Resound, Phonak, any of these ones that are Unitron, like any of these major brands. Good luck trying to find any spot online that you're actually going to get a real price, because this is, for an audiologist, this is really where a lot of the big money comes from. This is where they can really make their financial impact within this whole process. Because, you know, you can go, I believe every year you can have a free audio test with an audiologist. So you're not really generating the income. So that it's very protected in that regard. It's not surprising when you mention, you know, the cost of thousands of dollars, because that's been my experience generally. Now, also too, growing up, I mean, we didn't have the over-the-counter hearing aids as an option. And so I think there's really a democratization and access improvement when you have affordable over-the-counter hearing aids where the price is very transparent. People can make financial decisions accordingly and choose what is going to make the most sense for them, because, you know, not everyone can afford $7,000, $8,000 for a pair of hearing aids, despite the need for it and the necessity for it. So it's unfortunate it goes down that path. Now, there are some financial supports that could be available, things like assistive tech programs and device programs in Ontario for financial supports, but it doesn't usually cover everything. So there is still that financial burden that's unfortunately put on the consumer. But because there are more options available, there are more transparent options available, I think you're going to see the price come down, and it's going to be better for the consumer in the long run. I'm about to go through this process myself of buying hearing aids. I don't quite know where I'm going to begin. I'm going to start with my audiologist and see what they suggest and what the price points are going to be. But it's probably going to be a bit of like any other tech that you guys are very familiar with. You shop around, you try to find the best deal, and you identify what you want to get and where you can find it for the best price.
Yeah, no, you mentioned something interesting there, which was, you know, lots of options. And I think that, you know, just regular headphones that are offering the capability of adding the audiogram on it and, you know, custom tailoring it to your hearing profile definitely help drive things down. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to dive into that a bit more and talk about over the counter and see if you would even trust that option, and maybe ask you the question of the day as well. So we are in conversation with Alex Smyth. We'll be back in just a moment here on Access Tech Live. Stick around.
We want to hear from you. Follow us on social media and get involved at Access Tech Live. We'll be right back. The latest in tech and accessibility. This is Access Tech Live with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Welcome back to Access Tech Live. Alex Smyth, co-host and producer at AMI, is still with us. Alex, I just want to pick up on something you mentioned just before the break there. You were talking about your own decision to decide what to do in regards to your hearing aids. And I wonder, since we've been talking about over-the-counter hearing aids becoming more popular, and certainly cheaper in the US for sure, would you be comfortable buying something like this that you had to set up and configure yourself? Okay, granted, you'd have to get the audiologist involved a little bit, but this would allow you to essentially bring these home and set them up on your own. Would you be happy with that?
I don't know if I would, and part of it is it's also my personal case of with my hearing loss. It's listed as severe or moderate to severe, which most of these over-the-counter hearing aids are tackling in the range of more the mild to moderate. So I think even from that perspective, I don't know if they're going to offer the amount of clarity and hearing that I would require. And then on top of that, I always have questions about longevity and what is going to be the level of support that getting an over-the-counter hearing aid would afford me if I do have an issue. Now with my current hearing aids, I can go to my audiologist. Is that still going to be the same thing? If I get a pair of over-the-counter, am I going to have that same level of protection and support when there are issues that arise, or do I have to ship it off to the manufacturer on my own and wait until I get it back, and then in the meantime I'm stuck without hearing aids? I will say, I think they would be valuable for someone like myself as a backup pair, just in a very affordable, in case of an emergency, I can throw these on that I'm still not losing all my hearing. It could be a good stopgap solution in the meantime.
It's interesting you bring this up, and I think that's a very interesting point about the level of hearing loss you have, meaning that these might not be suitable for you. And I think about an equivalent with glasses, because there are lots of companies now where you can buy glasses online or through a phone number or through a website, even in stores sometimes. But I've had experience where when I've gone in, and this was a few years ago, I'd gone into a particular store to say I'd like to buy these glasses. And when I told them I was legally blind, they said they couldn't sell me the glasses because they couldn't sell them to people like me who were legally blind. I had to go through the ophthalmologist or whatever else. So that's interesting you bring that up, Alex. How have you learned about this? Because I think that's a very useful piece of information.
Yeah, and I think even to take the analogy further and the comparison further, I would almost view these over-the-counter hearing aids kind of like the non-prescription glasses you can find at your standard stores in and around, whether it's Scotland, Canada, or whatnot. They're good for people who really don't require much in terms of support for vision. You're not getting someone who's legally blind, who is really dependent on a very strong prescription in order to see clearly. It would be someone who has very minor vision loss or things like that. Like after I had cataract surgery, I was using just racked glasses to fill in that gap. Now that my eyes have settled a bit more, I have a very minor prescription, but it's still a prescription. So and it's still specialized. So I think that's kind of where I would view that comparison. That is like, it could be good for people who are very mild hearing loss and things like that, who don't need a lot of support, but once you get into the more severe side of things, that's where you want the more specialized care and through the specialized devices.
You talk about the specialized care and the support. What kind of support do you get from your audiologist? I'm curious how much handholding they really do.
Yeah, so if there ever is, because there's several parts to the hearing aid. There's the actual electronics device. There are in my case, the tube that is connected to the ear mold, and then the plastic hook that connects the ear mold to the device itself. All three kind of major parts have different issues associated with them. Let's say I get a new pair of hearing aids, and this is often the case. You set a specific programming level or an audio range or your presets. You go home, you listen to it for a few weeks. You know what? it's not quite here. I'm not hearing things quite well. It's a bit too noisy on a few different sectors or a few couple ranges. Well, I can go back to the audiologist, get that preset changed or those levels recalibrated. Oh, let's say there's a problem with my mold. Okay, well, the tube is broken or it gets brittle because after a while it dries out. Well, I can go back to them. I can get that repaired. I can get that fixed. The hook, oh, there's some moisture that got into it or it's cracked or it's not quite holding that seal anymore. I can get that replaced. That's not going to be the same thing if you're doing it yourself and you're just going to a store and getting it over the counter. So there is those types of kind of supports and services that you don't get otherwise.
Yeah, no, definitely. I cannot imagine someone just getting into hearing aids after having to deal with that stuff on their own. So that element of handholding might be worth a little bit extra just to get that advice from a specialist. You talk about, the fact that you're going to be shopping around for a new pair soon. What is the shelf life of a typical hearing aid? I'm sure they're not the same for every manufacturer and every device, but is there a standard kind of window?
Yeah, so for mine currently that I'm wearing, there was a warranty that I believe was between 5 and 6 years. Mine have been out of warranty, and part of it is I've kind of pushed off trying to go through this process because it is expensive, and then you throw in a 3-year gap with the pandemic. There's a lot of factors at play. So typically, yeah, it's about 5 years, and then to look at upgrading, obviously over the counter, it may be shorter depending on the technology. So they're not the longest serving piece of technology. So there are that consideration is needed as well, especially when you look at some of the prices that these higher end hearing aids cost. So it all comes into consideration because when I go to an audiologist now and need repairs or service done, I have to sign a waiver saying that if it gets damaged or broken during this part, I am giving up the liability and I understand that it is out of warranty, so it may cost me to repair it as a result.
Now, we were talking earlier about the different devices, and you mentioned that you don't go down the route of connecting your hearing aids to other devices at this point. You like to have a bit of control on that. And I think that's a really good point because there's the in real life phenomenon. Like you say, if you need to get up and go, you need to do something, you want to be aware of your situation and aware of your environment. And that's really important to talk about because we all have lots of technology we can bring into our lives, but sometimes it can get in the way, right? And I'm thinking about things like, there's lots of devices now that have the ability to perform in a similar way to what hearing aids can do. I think about the AirPods Pro 2, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. And Mark mentioned it earlier. They've got a number of features available to them for people with hearing impairments. Have you looked into any of that? Have you tried any of that? And I'm thinking under the category of fun here. Because look, we all like to have fun, right? It doesn't have to be medical. It can be for fun as well. Have you ever played with any of this stuff?
I haven't because I always look at it as like, oh, well, this can mimic a hearing aid. You know what else can mimic a hearing aid? My hearing aids. And so that's always the approach I tend to take. And, like the AirPods are always an interesting one because I've heard phenomenal things about it. And it's one that I think I would be most likely to try in that regard. But then even beyond that, like I've always been fascinated by bone conduction headphones, something designed for deaf and hard of hearing users. But the problem I always have is, I wear glasses as well. So typically things that are there to support one disability oftentimes comes in conflict with my other form. So having both the hearing and vision, having two senses impacted, it kind of limits what I'm willing to try. But that said, I would be more willing to try something like the AirPods if I haven't been so used to the over-ear headphones. Like I do have earbuds, but it's usually hard lines because, living with vision loss, if I drop one of those things, I'm not finding them. That's my big key. At least with the hearing aids, they're locked in place. They're hooked around the ear. They're not just dangling on my earlobe.
Alex, before we let you go, I got one quick question for you, and that's for people who are suffering hearing loss and whether they admit it to themselves or not. What would you say to somebody who's kind of on the fence and not really sure if they should go into their audiologist? Maybe because they're scared, maybe they don't want to admit it, maybe they, tell us about the other side, when you have the hearing aid, the difference in the experience of life.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Like the fact that having lived with hearing loss over 90% of my life. Like, I literally am able to blend in conversations, and oftentimes the number of times people have told me, I completely forgot you have hearing loss, and it never comes up because the hearing aids do such a great job that I hear 98% of all conversations. And if you are suffering from hearing loss and you get self-conscious of having to constantly re-ask, what did you say? What do you mean? You may not even be aware of the level of isolation that you put on yourself because you want to avoid those types of situations. The technology is as good as it's ever been. It will make it feel like if you had full hearing before, it will make it so you're almost at that point, and you forget that you suffered hearing loss, and you can feel interconnected in ways in conversations and out in public that you may have been suffering and missing, and you haven't even been aware of it.
Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's nice to be on the other side of the conversation for once, as opposed to being interviewed by you. You're welcome to come back anytime, so no invitation needed. That is Alex Smyth, everyone. You can find him, of course, on great AMI TV programming. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and answers to the question we asked you. Would you buy over-the-counter hearing aids to save money? Stick around. It's Access Tech Live.
We want to hear from you. Follow us on social media and get involved at Access Tech Live. We'll be right back.